Hey everybody, welcome to another Facebook Live provided by Grit Marketing Group. My name is Kevin Kresge and I'm the Digital Marketing Director here at Grit, and I'm happy to be with you again this afternoon. And today, well, before we get started, I have to do a couple, like shameless self-promotional items. First off, I'd love it if you would go over to creategrit.com/newsletter and sign up for our newsletter called The Nitty Gritty. It is an excellent newsletter, and got to say, we try and keep some great articles in there each month for you to stay on top of industry shifts just like we do. So once again, go over to creategrit.com/newsletter and check it out. All right, and we'll come back to that in a little while. Today, we are going to be talking about what is Google AMP and why is it important. So I'm just going to jump right in here with a brief history of kind of leading into the whole Google AMP thing. We're going to talk just for a couple of minutes about the history of mobile with Google. So Google's been, over the past 4 to 5 years, been making a shift, a really, really visible shift towards mobile technology rather than desktop technology when it comes to browsing devices, right? And by browsing devices, I mean laptop computers, desktop computers, tablets, mobile phones, smartphones. Google's been making a concerted effort to shift web industry over to mobile rather than desktop. So here's a little bit of the history behind that. So in about November of 2014, there was a lot of chatter in the Google Webmaster Forum, really talking about definitely needing to make an effort. Companies definitely need to make an effort to shift their websites towards having a mobile interface. Mobile viewports, being mobile friendly, having a responsive design wasn't really a thing that was very popular up until about the end of 2014. We really started to see a shift in that direction for companies that didn't have one before. Prior to that, companies tended to do more of the m.yourdomain.com kind of thing, where they would create an entirely separate website that was mobile oriented, rather than having an actual responsive designed website where content, or even mobile friendly, where content would be manually repositioned for certain screen sizes. So in 2014, about the end of 2014, there's a lot of chatter, and we started seeing tools be released. Like Google released their mobile-friendly test tool in November 2014. And this was kind of an alarm bell to a lot of people in the web search industry. We started tossing around the term Mobilegeddon, and we started seeing Google testing other things like special icons on search results, like a little mobile phone icon, where it was like really tiny, but it was like right next to the result in search. That started happening in the beginning of 2015, and then all of a sudden, April of 2015, the name Mobilegeddon was no joke, like that was an industry term. Google started not really ranking sites based on mobile interface, but yes and no, but they really started to push and make it clear websites that had a mobile-friendly interface. If you had mobile and were tested as mobile-friendly, you were more apt to show up towards the top of results. So I guess, yeah. Early to mid-2016, Google started making some content shifts towards keywords where the context of a website started to become more important than the keywords that were in it. So your whole website needed to start telling a stronger brand story as opposed to just keyword stuffing in the pages. So like that old kind of semi-black hat, gray hat tactic of having the big paragraph of text at the bottom of the page. It was like 8,000 keywords all in that huge paragraph. That whole tactic got blown away at that point. It's around the same time frame, right around February 2016, Google launched Google AMP, Accelerated Mobile Pages is what that stands for, and which Google AMP is, we'll get into this a little bit more in a second, but really designed to provide content optimized specifically for mobile devices, and I'll get into that a little bit. Moving through 2016 into 2017, Google started shifting more towards that whole really algorithm updates were like kind of the name of the game over that 2-year period, where it was like algorithm update after algorithm update, when they really were pushing more towards that whole content context story of the website and getting rid of more of the spammy results in search. Really an effort to just kind of clean up the search results more than try and invent anything new in that time frame. And then end of last year, Google really starts kind of saber rattling as far as mobile and really making, really trying to make the mobile experience more important. And the way they went about doing that was they started talking about splitting the desktop index away from the mobile index when it comes to search. So websites would rank differently in search results on mobile devices versus desktop devices. Real driving reason behind that, hey Tracy, real driving reason behind that is, absolutely about making sure that because 70% of searches at this point were starting to come in on mobile devices, they really wanted to make sure that they were not influencing the mobile results with the desktop results. So, early this year they did it. They split the indexes, and that's been a thing now for a little bit. And then of course we know that now page load speeds are becoming a ranking factor, and not only that, they are, I think, kind of testing, if they haven't already made it one, AMP as a ranking factor, for sites that have AMP installed. But I don't know that they ever will go that far, and we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes, because while AMP is useful, it's not something that's useful across the board to every single website that's out there. It's not necessarily the right strategic direction for everybody, and we'll talk about why in a few minutes. So really that brings us to the core question of today, which is, what is Google AMP? So short version, right? Short version, Google AMP is sort of a limited code version of your website pages or posts, created solely with the intent of restructuring your content visibly, really slimming down the data usage of your pages to make it load very quickly, on mobile devices, right? So that's the short version. Long version of that is, it's kind of a new standard invented by Google as far as code. So you have to meet that standard to certify, to have your pages kind of certify with Google as, AMP pages, right? And the advantage here is that if you do this right, you don't even serve the AMP content off of your website. The AMP content gets pulled up to Google's data centers, is cached there, and is served from there. So you have to do it right, otherwise they won't host it, and at that point you effectively lose the whole advantage of having AMP pages. So you want to make sure that you're doing it right, and you've got the AMP pages optimized. So that's the long version, right? So basically we move on to our next question of, why and when at that point should I use Google AMP for my website, right? Everybody wants to know. So I think it maybe would be better if I set it up from the perspective of why you shouldn't use Google AMP rather than why you should. And I know that sounds a little silly given I'm doing a whole Facebook Live about this today, but Google AMP is not the magical ranking answer for mobile devices. It's not going to be like this magic bullet that all of a sudden you get tons more traffic, and really it's just not necessarily the right size to fit everybody. And here's why. Google didn't create AMP to improve e-commerce. They didn't create AMP to improve like basic website operation and help with lead gen and a lot of the inbound strategies that businesses are doing. Really, AMP is designed to help optimize ideation, right? Blogs, article content, almost from a news perspective. You actually start to see now news organizations and magazines really starting to take advantage of AMP, which is basically what it was designed for. Ideally, as people are consuming that content, that it's using less data for them because Google's actually caching it. You'll see articles from like Forbes and Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Times will have the /amp in their URL, designating that it is an AMP page, and you'll only see that on your mobile devices, or if you share it from mobile, and then you get that kind of redesigned version of the page. It's lighter weight. So if you're going after, if you have an e-commerce site, or if your primary focus is, services, like I'm selling services, goods or services, right? And you're trying to generate leads, not really the right tool. Google AMP is not the right tool. However, if you really want to promote and sell the notion of, you've got great ideas and you're using a blog or you have a knowledge center, a knowledge base on your website for technical support, Google AMP is the right tool. And certainly you want to implement it there, because then that content becomes instantly available and more likely to appear on mobile because of the fact that it's optimized for mobile, and not only that, it's serving directly from Google. So if once again, e-commerce, lead gen, not so great. Blog, idea generation, news, right, magazine, more zany content, right, you are going to want to implement Google AMP. So you can do both. If you have a blog on your website, if you have ideation, on your website, but you're also doing e-com, it's okay to implement Google AMP. I'm not saying don't expect Google AMP to optimize your e-commerce interface or your lead gen interface. That advanced functionality does not play well with Google AMP. I mean, you can get it to work, but a lot of the JavaScript and stuff behind the scenes that has to load and work are not enabled or are completely blocked and will actually cause errors if you try and run them inside of Google AMP. So really, advantage to you if you don't do that. It's going to be much easier for you. So let's talk about how do you actually use Google AMP, right? Next question. So there's a few basic requirements to use Google AMP on your website. One of those basic requirements is you have to be secure. Now, you're going to want to have your site be secure anyway, because SSL certificates, actually having that HTTPS, has become a ranking factor. And certainly Google is doing everything they can to kind of scare users into using secure sites. It's been a ranking factor for a little while now to be secure, but now when you go in Chrome especially, now that Chrome has major market share at this point, Chrome now says not secure if you don't have an SSL certificate installed on your site. Long story short though, if you try and implement Google AMP, if you try and use it without having that SSL certificate installed, Google is going to ignore your content. It's not going to get cached, it's not going to be used. Those pages won't show up in search. You will lose. All right? Plain and simple. You will not win. You will not pass go. You will not collect $200. Google will pass your content and just ignore it. So it behooves you from not only an SEO perspective, but also if you want to use something like Google AMP, get that SSL certificate. They are not expensive. You can get a basic SSL certificate, depending on who you're hosting with, for as cheap as $75 up to like $125, or if you need a more advanced certificate, you're looking at maybe $500–600 a year, depending on how many domains you're securing and what your structure is. So it can be pricey, but it's also one of the most simple and cheap things that you can do. And if you want to use Google AMP, it is a must-have. You've got to have it. So once your content is secure, right? So here's the next step on how to use Google AMP. You have to have a separate page, separate version of your page that is designated as Google AMP content and has to have /amp as the URL. So like it'll be your standard, like if you had an article title, blah, 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 /amp. That's going to be your page URL for your AMP content, right? You'll want to make sure that that is included in your sitemap. And then you're going to need to do some things behind the scenes, right? You're going to have a canonical URL that points to the original content as as the fact that it is the original content. But then inside the site header, the head section of your code, you're also going to have a link that says, here's the AMP version of that content that points over to that. Once you have those things, then you're solid, you're golden, you're good to go, right? And that kind of does that forward and backwards linking of how the pages need to refer to one another so that Google sees that they're there and indexes it, but then you also want to make sure that you have that inside your sitemap so that happens. So that can be a little complicated if you're running a static website, right? If you're running like some of the newer CMSs out there that are flat file, that means they don't have a database behind the scenes. This can be a little more complicated. If you're running a site that's built on like MVC or like .NET or something along a little older technology, that's more kind of app development programming language, some of this isn't as easy. However, if you're running on like a WordPress site, if you're running on WordPress, there are a couple other CMSs that support AMP for blog sections, but you can run a plugin on WordPress. And this is primarily how we implemented at Grit, where you can use a plugin on WordPress to automatically generate the AMP version where you can actually design the look and feel of your AMP page. You do get basic styling, so you can set menu colors, button colors, image sizes, fonts, that kind of stuff. You can set all that and kind of mimic your site's basic look and feel. Once you've done that, then you implement the plugin, you tell it what pages and posts you want it to run on. You can, I personally, posts is it, or custom post types. You don't want to really try and do pages, especially if you're doing things like lead gen and you're using contact forms. It's not the right place, and you'll have really struggle to make it work. So that said, and like I said, Google may even reject those pages. It might throw errors and say, you can't do that here. And you'll see that in your Google Search Console, formerly Webmaster Tools. That's where you'll see those errors. It'll tell you what pages qualify as, it'll tell you what pages qualify as AMP, and which ones have errors and which ones don't, and what you're doing wrong, so you can actually fix it, right? So we use a plugin to accomplish that, and generally, and it makes it very easy to implement on WordPress. So if you're on a WordPress site, if you're running a WordPress site, consider the fact that you can run Google AMP and make it work, and it's actually somewhat painless. It's easier with the paid version of the plugin rather than the free. You get more styling options, and you can really make it look like you want it to look. Outside of that, once your Google AMP pages are up to snuff, then you want to tell Google that you're doing that. So you need to make sure that your site is connected to Google Search Console and validated, verified, connected to analytics. And then the other thing that you want to do is submit a good sitemap that has all of your AMP pages inside of it. And once that's done, then you are good to go. And it really, I don't want to make it sound like it's really that easy, because it can be a pain in the butt. But you can make it work, and it's a lot easier than trying to implement it on a static site. Oh my God, like if somebody came to me and said, hey, I really want to implement this, and they didn't have WordPress as a backbone CMS or one of the other CMS systems that offers a plugin or some kind of automation for AMP, I would probably run away. I would actually probably decline that, because the cost for doing that would be prohibitively expensive. I mean, like insanely prohibitively expensive. Just so much so that you wouldn't want to do it. But here's the deal, right? So this is where the pitch comes into play. So if you're looking to do Google AMP, if you want to make sure that you are lifting your search results as high as you can, reach out to us. I mean, certainly it's something that we've done on multiple websites. Google AMP is easy for us to implement, probably not so much for like the average user, just because of all the little check boxes that you got to knock out before you can make sure that Google's actually going to take it, accept it, and work with you on it. So, certainly we'd be more than willing here at Grit to help you out with it. It's actually, like I said, it's easier for us, not so easy for, average user out there that might just know how to make a post in WordPress. Outside of that, but I mean, feel free to reach out to us at creategrid.com. We'd love to talk to you about it. At this time, we did have a couple of questions come in about Google AMP, not in the Facebook Live, but through the blog post. And outside of that, as we were getting ready for everything today. And so a couple of those questions, people were asking how accelerated mobile pages hit and affect SEO. So it is pretty simple in that they do affect SEO. Obviously, it's not going to impact your desktop results, especially now that the indexes are split apart and you have the desktop index and the mobile index. It will impact your mobile index results, because as that content gets indexed and Google sees that you have AMP content, it's going to show that AMP content in search results. And you'll even get a little lightning bolt icon next to the result, and it might even say AMP now, I think, next to it. Google's always testing the interface to see how people react to various presentation of new stuff. So you might see a little mobile phone. You might see a little mobile phone with a lightning bolt in the screen. You might just see a lightning bolt. You might see a lightning bolt and a little word amp. They've tested all these different designs over the last 6-8 months. But point being, you'll know because they'll designate on the screen that it is AMP content. But like I said, that'll only show up in your mobile search results. So you will get a little bit of a boost in mobile. So go for that for sure. Make sure you're doing that. Okay, so who benefits from AMP? Well, it's kind of that's a kind of a two-way question, right? I mean, there's two answers. Everybody really benefits from it in the sense that the business owner, the brand benefits from it in the sense that they're now getting content that moves further up in search than everybody else's because they have AMP content and the other guy doesn't. So there's some brand advantage there to making sure that you're doing that. So there's that, right, from the brand side. From the end user side, they're receiving the content more quickly. It's more data friendly. So if I'm out and about and I ask Google a question on my phone and, you get the search result comes up and I click on it, it's going to load more quickly because it's cached with Google's data center, which will very likely serve the content faster than the web server could have anyway. That's just kind of how it is. And then it uses less data on my phone. So my data plan doesn't suffer when I'm looking at somebody's content. And all of the images still load and all that stuff still loads. So, I mean, there's some other optimization things you're going to want to look at there. But, here's the other side of that, right? You just heard what I said about when I ask Google a question on my mobile device. This is a key thing to remember. Write for voice search when you're writing your blog content. Make sure that headlines and content in your article are shaped up and written just the way somebody might ask the question to Google. Voice search operates differently for people than the old school, old school. I mean, the internet was invented like 20 years ago, and I'm talking about old school already. But here's the deal. Write for voice search. 70% of search queries are coming in on mobile devices now, and primarily, not primarily, a lot of those are now done by voice, where you say, "Okay, Google," and start asking your phone a question, and people are natural language asking Google questions. So if you're writing, "How do I do this XXX as my title," right, and XYZ, and you're writing towards how somebody's going to search for that if they ask the question directly to their phone, then from a voice search perspective, you're going to rank better because you're directly answering the question that people are asking. So there's that, and there's also some content structure we talked about the last time in how to write a blog. But consider that when you're considering implementing Google AMP, is how you implement your content, right, and how you write it. How will you know you're on AMP? I kind of answered that already in that you'll see that you have a URL that contains the word AMP at the end of it. Beyond that, you'll see in the search result that it's an AMP page that you're going to be going to, which if I'm looking for more advanced functionality, I may not want to go to the AMP version, right? But I'm going to know that because this is what I do. The Joe average user might not know that, so they might have to look at how you might have to think strategically about how you're going to move a user into a function workflow. You can certainly move somebody from an AMP page to a lead generation form page, so strategically be thinking about that. Can you monetize AMP? Yes and no. It is possible to run ads on AMP pages. Google does not like it when you do it. In fact, I believe you do get an error now if you try and do that. So I'd recommend against it. You can monetize AMP in the sense that you can funnel people from an AMP article, an AMP page, to a conversion point on your site. You can move them into e-commerce. You can move them from your AMP into e-commerce, from your AMP into into a lead gen page where you can collect their info. And then how would I combine AMP with other marketing? That's a good question. Really, that's about my content strategy. If I were looking to I might maybe consider, it's certainly going to make me consider writing the articles that I create a little bit differently, more towards that mobile user intent, right? I'm going to be looking for what I can do right now. The mobile user intent is much more about now, buy now, get now, learn now, call now. So I'm going to write more effectively towards that direction from a strategy perspective. So that's how I would leverage that. Outside of that, I mean, that answers, unless you guys have some questions. I mean, we have a few people on. If you have some questions about Google AMP, now's the time. Otherwise, in just another minute, we're going to move on. But once again, I'm just going to, shameless promotion here, of course. Make sure you sign up for the nitty-gritty newsletter from Grit. We send one out every month. We just sent one out a couple of days ago. But you'll always learn about our upcoming Facebook Lives that we have scheduled, as well as industry news and other blog articles that we've written, as well as the team here at Grit grows. We do let you know about new folks joining the Grit team, and just try and keep you up to speed on all that. So, once again, just want to say thanks. It's been great to have you here with us today on Facebook Live, and certainly enjoy the rest of your afternoon. We finally have some sun. My retinas are burning out because it's hitting me right in the face here, but it's actually nice to feel the sun on my face today, because we've been having that Forrest Gump-esque 4 months of straight up rain here in the last few days, right? So anyway, you guys have a great afternoon. Thanks for joining us. And this was, once again, this was what is Google AMP and why should you use it? Have a great one. Take care.